So as participants are starting to get on the call, we're going to get started here in about, we'll give it another 30 seconds or so that people get on. We're really excited about today's webinar with our special guests, especially given what's been transpiring in the United States House last night. So lots of things to discuss. So while we still have people joining, I want to be super mindful of the Congressman's time and go ahead and get started. Thank you so much, Congressman, for joining us today to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the child care system in Ohio. I'm Shannon Jones, and I'm the Executive Director of Groundwork, Ohio, and we're the nonpartisan public policy research and advocacy organization that really champions policies in the prenatal to age 5 space, because we know that these are the policies that really lay a strong foundation for our kids and our families and our communities. So we're delighted to be able to help assist in this conversation today. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Congressman Tim Ryan is going to be joining us in this webinar. He's a member of Congress from the 13th District since 2003. He serves on the House Appropriations Committee, which is super important for us. He also is a co-sponsor of the Child Care is Essential Act and was able to help get that act passed by the U.S. House last night, which is the $50 billion commitment to our child care system. So we're really thrilled to have him here today. He also served in the Ohio State Senate, where he spearheaded efforts to establish a state-based earned income tax credit. So policies around working families have always been important to him. So welcome, Congressman Ryan. Next slide, please. Congressman, I'm just going to level set for you a little bit because I know that you're always interested in how the policies that you pass in Washington, what's happening on the ground. And so I'm going to give you just a little bit of background on what we've been seeing in this pandemic period and then turn it over to the panelists today. So as you know, all of childcare in Ohio was forced to close on March 26th of this year. We did have a special pandemic license, however, because we needed to have childcare operations for our essential workers. And that pandemic license went into effect and expired on May 31st of this year. That license required some childcare to open under reduced ratios and group sizes and increased health and safety expectations in order to serve only those children whose parents were essential workers. To give you some context on that, prior to the pandemic, we had about 117,000 children in our publicly funded child care system on any given day. So those are families that were on subsidy at 130% of federal poverty or less. So we have one of the lowest eligibility rates in the country, and that we still, even with that low eligibility, we still had 117,000 children who were qualifying for this program, meaning their parents were working. During the closure period of time, so where these pandemic licenses were operating, that number dipped to 15,500 nearly overnight. And upon reopening, we're still seeing that number while increasing, and it's increasing fairly steadily, but we're still only at about, on any given day, 30%, 30,000 children in PFCC. So we've seen a massive compression in the demand, and that's certainly impacting the supply. Next slide. Thank you. So I wanted to share with you the $3.5 billion that you had invested in our nation's CCDBG, or our Child Care Development Block Grant, how that was used in Ohio. In Ohio, that meant $120 million went into crisis pandemic resources for our childcare system. The first 60 million of that was spent during that pandemic period of time that I mentioned. So that 2-month period of time where the small number of families were still being served in childcare. So increasing the amount of needs by providers because of safety equipment, PPE, cleaning supplies, but also because of the much reduced ratios and classroom sizes that were really impacting the business model. The other $60 million was used during the reopening period of time over the last 2 months. That was used in grants by ODJFS to support both our publicly funded childcare providers and our private childcare providers to assist them in reopening. Again, we are currently operating under restricted ratios and classroom sizes, and so the resources are many. Our providers have many needs, and those resources are done at the end of this week. So that entire investment that you've made in this system heretofore is in effect spent. It was essential to getting us to where we are, but it's still not sufficient to get us to where we need to be. So to give you a little bit of sort of detail around our concern is that if we assume now, since the governor has just announced a return to regular ratios starting on August 9th, if we assume that our child care providers are able to operate at 80% of capacity at the high water mark, so given that a lot of folks are unemployed now and aren't using child care, or parents are concerned about putting their children in congregate settings and are making other decisions, we know that the demand for child care will be less. But if we assume at an 80% capacity rate, in Ohio, 53% of our programs would be expected to close within 6 months. So this is causing great reverberation and concern in our sector, and we know it's going to have devastating impacts to the economy as we try to return to some sense of normalcy. And that's really why we're so grateful that you and many of your colleagues supported this $50 billion investment in dedicated flexible funds that will allow Ohio to receive about $1.67 billion to support our system, our children, the families who depend on it, the businesses who depend on these families, and our child care providers, who I'm going to tell you are some of the most inspirational, brave people that have been working as essential workers. That equates to, Congressman, about 6 to 9 months for us. And so even though we're talking about really big numbers, our estimates is that that's going to buy us 6 to 9 months. And hopefully it's a sufficient period of time that will allow us to really dig out of the hole, understand where the capacity concerns are, and be able to build forward better. Next slide. So today's panel of experts you're going to hear from is first Laura DeCola. She's the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Summit Education Initiative based in Akron. Also, Curtisine Cunningham, she's the Director of Little Discover's STEM Academy Childcare. And Mary Beth Bush, who's the owner of Mary's Little Lambs, who's a family childcare provider. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura to get us started, because she's going to be able to talk about what this means from a system standpoint, and then we'll get to our providers to talk about their individual perspectives.
Good morning. Thank you, Congressman, for all that you're doing to support the industry and for your voice. It's very meaningful. My organization is Summit Education Initiative, and as Shannon said, we're located in Akron and serving Summit County, and our mission is to advance local and regional prosperity through equitable educational attainment. And we really feel that this issue of ensuring that we have safe, reliable, affordable, quality childcare is really essential to our work because we really know that what happens in these earliest years is what sets our kids and families on a path to success all along the educational continuum. And so our lens really focuses on something that's kind of overlooked and oftentimes get lost in that childcare is really a dual, it serves two dual purposes. One, in doing the very important function of supporting our workforce and allowing families to work. We know, employers count on it for a thriving and reliable workforce. Families need it to ensure that they can do it. But it's also about this educational purpose of getting kids ready to learn so that they have educational success and economic opportunity. So that's the lens we bring to why we feel this is such an important conversation to have. We know that COVID has exposed both the weaknesses and the very deep cracks in our system. And it's highlighted both the bedrock role that childcare plays, again, in our communities and economic infrastructure. And it's highlighted more, businesses can't really get back to work full steam until our education system and our childcare system has come back. And there, of course, will be no economic recovery until this childcare system is there in place. We know in Akron, for example, like many communities, will be starting school online at least for the first 9 weeks. And so some of this has really exacerbated already existing problems. Our biggest community-wide challenges, even prior to the pandemic, was we were working to ensure and address the precarious nature of the childcare industry, where programs are already operating on razor-thin margins. And you'll be hearing more from the providers on this call on what those specific challenges really are. But as Shannon highlighted, with this 53% figure of programs anticipating to close within 6 months if relief is not there, it again makes a really bad problem already worse. For example, in some of our neighborhoods and communities, they're childcare deserts where there are no affordable quality childcare for parents to take advantage of. So prior to the pandemic, our work here in the community was focused on growing access to those programs and enhancing capacity. And now, of course, we are scrambling to sustain and not lose too much capacity within our systems. Because we certainly know if our programs continue to close, what this means when we come back to quote unquote normal, these sites are closing permanently and they're not coming back. So it will not only impact our childcare capacity, but it's really going to undermine all of the very significant investments that have been made in the system from a state standpoint over the course of the last 30 years in building up a quality system that recognizes that childcare is more than a babysitting or daycare place, a safe place for families to drop their children off while they work, but it is really the place where all that early learning occurs. And so it undermines the systemic investments that we've made in this state in a quality infrastructure, the investments that our governor has made to kind of put the Band-Aid on the system to get us to where we are here in the course of the pandemic, and then some very significant local investments that our community has been making to kind of close and fill gaps where those gaps exist in the system. So again, I want to really highlight this important educational role that this does. The early experiences that take place in our childcare centers and family childcare centers and places where kids go when their parents work is so critical to seeding their success. It's hardwiring their brains in a way that sets them up for all future learning and sets them on a path to success in school and in life. For example, we know that when kids start kindergarten ready to learn, they are twice as likely as their peers who are not ready to be reading at grade level in third grade, which is a pivotal point in a child's educational journey. So what happens before a child even walks through the doors in kindergarten is the single most effective strategy to ensure that they're going to be reading in third grade in a way that sets them up for school success. And I'll just note incidentally that third grade reading, kids who read at third grade, that's the better predictor of which kids are going to be succeeding in 8th grade math and 9th grade math than actually the math tests are. So that third grade point is so pivotal. And what happens again in those early years is what's moving those levers there to ensure we have children who are successful academically and then become successful members of the workforce. So in the last few minutes I want to just talk really high level about the local investments that our community has made and of which I'm very, very proud. We are addressing gaps in the system. Our local and private dollars have come in to support, to provide very strong supports to many of our local childcare centers in our most, in our Akron area, our most populous area, putting coaching and money and resource in helping to lift and alleviate some of the crunched financial margins and burdens that are being imposed on these. But that local investment's a drop in a bucket and it's not sustainable. We absolutely need systems level investment at all levels, both the state and at the federal level. And without this kind of investment that you're championing, Congressman, all of these investments will go to waste and our infrastructure will crumble. And so it's very, very important that we have this kind of sustainable, deep investment in the sector to allow it to grow and thrive. And so with that, I will leave it to my colleagues to really highlight some of the specific challenges that they're facing that make this such a difficult issue.
Thank you, Laura. And I'm going to turn it over to Courtesine to speak here quickly in a moment, but I just want to remind the Congressman's constituents who are on, we have nearly 100 people right now on the line. Please use the chat box to share your stories and to ask your questions, because we will share all of this with the Congressman's staff following this, so they can read about the things that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So we want to be able to collect that feedback. It's invaluable to us. So Courtesine, why don't you quickly give some details around what you've been dealing with on the ground in a center.
Hi, thank you all for having me on the panel. Thank you, Congressman Ryan, for your time and listening to our voices. I am on a panel as a small business owner of a mom and pop, so to speak. We're not a part of a large chain of child care centers. It's an intimate child care center, and we have experienced significant obstacles as we work intimately with our families in Akron. We work right there with them in every capacity, not only providing high quality education, but also a lot of our families are in crisis. And our families are in need of not only educational services, but also wraparound services, supportive services. And we are there to help them through that journey. And throughout the pandemic and with the loss of funding, we have severely reduced the amount of families that we can serve in the Akron area. And we have reduced our capacity to 50%, and thus leading to a 50% deficit in funding. And that deficit is so detrimental because we signed up for the pandemic license, but we could not provide services because our workers, our teachers, they have significant health issues, but they were still willing to sacrifice, and they felt a moral obligation to sacrifice so that they could help the essential workers. And the additional funding is necessary to retain staff, to pay our teachers for that, for their sacrifice, pay our teachers who are typically low wage workers for stepping up and being there at a time where we were needed. And we are in dire need at this moment for the additional funding so that we can sustain the childcare industry, so that we can continue to serve our families and also help be a part of the solution with getting our economy back on track.
Thank you, Curtizine. I really appreciate that perspective. And Mary Beth, I'm wondering if you can share, I know your home-based care is in a really unique position. Can you share with the Congressman who you're serving and some of the challenges you're having?
Sure. My name's Mary Beth Bush, and I've been a family child care provider in Trumbull County for over 25 years. So I'd like to just share, I took every opportunity to go back to school. I got my CDA, and just to make sure that I was giving the highest quality care with an emphasis on social emotional development and school readiness. I got my CDA in 1998, then went on to get my associate degree, went on to become nationally accredited. Then when Step Up to Quality came in, I became a 5-star center in my home, which I'm the only one in Trumbull County. And then I also went on to get my bachelor's degree. So even after making such a huge investment in my educational and getting a little bit of reimbursement for being a 5-star, I was still not able to sustain my high quality program. I need affordable health care and a consistent revenue. Family child care and like Curtizine's center, we get paid after services are rendered, not based on enrollment. So therefore, if my enrollment decreased, so did my revenue. So in 2019, I had to make the decision to leave my daycare full-time and go out and get a full-time job. But I still feel obligated to those parents who need me, so I still, in the evenings and on the weekends, care for the children at the Youngstown Air Force Base children when they're doing their training and so forth. So I still do that. And I did stay open during the pandemic and got my pandemic license, but they had the Air Force working from home, so they did not need me in the evenings or on the weekends. So I was there, but didn't need that. And then as Shannon talked about with that NAEYC document, that 48% across the country, but 53% in Ohio are at risk of closing their businesses, including the family child care, who we are there for the evenings for all the different professions like critical care nurses, firefighters, and like the reservists that I care for, and other essential workers who don't work the traditional hours. And as we know, the social emotional growth in children, they need secure relationships and continuity of care with trusted quality providers especially now during this pandemic time. So while my enrollment is low, the families I serve will eventually be returning to a more normal schedule, like 2-3 months from now. And when they come back, if I'm not there, I don't know who will support them during, when they do have to get back to work. There is no other alternate care for that. In connecting with other providers also, I talked to many of them and they're also struggling. In fact, 2 larger family child care providers who care for 12 children, they're only at about 30% enrollment, so they're not able to bring their staff back, similar to what Curtizine mentioned. Their staff is making more on unemployment than what they can pay them. But I just wanted to point out that how important family child care is, because we do work the off hours, we work the evenings, the weekends, we're caring for all the paramedics, the law enforcement, fast food workers, grocery store workers, and many of whom are single parents that do not work those 9-to-5 jobs. So if these providers cannot survive, these parents will have nowhere else to take their children, and will either have to quit their job, take time off, or make that tough decision to leave their children in an unsafe or unregulated environment. So thank you for your time, Congressman. So
yeah, thank you so much. And Congressman, you've been so generous with your time and listening to our concerns and the concerns of your constituents. And we'd love to be able to turn it over to you now for you to ask any of the panelists any questions or share some of your perspectives now that this piece of legislation has passed the House, and what sort of prospects you might see for support in the child care sector in this hotly negotiated conversation that's happening right now.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, first, I just want to say I don't think Mary Beth's background is not Trumbull County, Ohio. I just want to say that. I want to come where you are, Mary Beth. No, I'm just teasing you. Yeah, let me just go through the bill we passed last night a little bit and just give a little bit more detail. And then I do have a question or two that I'd love to get answered. First, let me just say my wife is a first grade school teacher. We have 3 kids. Our oldest is 17, and then 16, and Brady just turned 6. So we've, just in the last 5 or 6 years have gone through this whole idea of, I work out of town, 3 of the 4 weeks of a month. I'm gone for 4 days. And Brady was born, and none of the older kids could drive yet. They didn't have their driver's license. And my wife was home, basically with 3 kids, and went back to work. So we know, and this is why it's obviously very important to me on my my day job of really trying to have an impact on the issue of childcare, because even though I've got a good job and she's got a good job, it's a squeeze. And it's very, very stressful. And then you throw other kids into the mix. You also have to go to their events and sporting events and get to school and all of that. That doesn't stop because you have another kid. So we're very tuned into what a lot of the families are going through, and we know that this infrastructure of childcare is really critically important for society. And I think when you look at the United States compared to other countries, when it comes to paid vacation, paid sick days, family and medical leave, the issues we're talking about here, this all wraps around the idea of, how do we take care of our kids? How do we make sure our kids are ready to learn and ready to grow? And, Mary Beth talked a lot about the social and emotional learning aspect of what our kids need. And that starts very, very early. The brain science in the last 20 years is off the charts with the importance of a connection, wiring the brain up properly, reducing trauma that bears itself out over a person's lifetime. I mean, you're seeing all of these studies come in now on adverse childhood experiences and what that means. And, every kid is different. And so not having those secure environments, long-term detrimental effects to whether or not they smoke, whether or not they get cancer, whether or not they end up in prison, that all comes down to these very formative years. So we believe it. That's why we passed this bill out of the House. We're going to work to get as much of this into the compromised package as we possibly can. Just to give you a quick background on that, the bill that came out of the House was much more comprehensive. It was about $3.5 trillion in unemployment insurance and all of the rest, but including supplemental nutrition and other things. The Senate bill is very bare bones, shall we say. And so we wanted to pass this bill to just kind of put a marker down as to this is really a priority. I'm not confident, to be honest with everybody, that we'll get anything close to this. I'm hoping we get some, to at least plug the hole. And then, maybe we could do more after the election or very early next year. But, like you said early on, that these businesses, like a lot of the businesses that we're worried about, you don't just close a business and open it back up. You need loans, you need capital, you need a workforce, you need all of these things. And so keeping them afloat, and people say, well, how are you going to pay for all this? And my response has been over the last few months is that what we spend now will pale into comparison if we don't spend anything and we let everything collapse and then try to jumpstart it again, out of a depression, not a recession, because there's a huge jobs impact, including with this. So let me just go through this real quick. This Child Care is Essential Act. It provides grant funding to child care providers to basically stabilize the child care sector and provide enough resources for you all to safely reopen. That's the key. It's $50 billion stabilization grants for personnel costs, sanitation, cleaning, training, and other goods and services needed to maintain or resume operation of the child care program. And I think each of the panelists mentioned something along those lines of the increased costs. This is support for child care workers. It requires employers to keep child care workers on payroll at the same compensation level as pre-COVID as a condition of receiving stabilization grant funds. So it's not just going to go to the business and not make its way down to the child care worker, which we want to ensure happens. Support for working families. It requires providers to relieve families of co-payments or tuition. The Child Care for Economic Recovery Act makes significant ongoing federal investments in child care to support children and working families. So this means $10 billion in infrastructure to improve child care safety, $850 million to support family care for essential workers, and increases funding for federal child care programs. So what you mentioned, both the limited arrangement around essential workers, but also broader than that. It enhances the child and dependent care tax credit, expands the dependent care flexible spending accounts so that families can put some money away for dependents, and creates a new tax credit to help employees access quality, affordable child care. Super, super important. And it includes a new refundable payroll tax credit. I think this is really important for child care providers and incentivizes employers to keep child care workers on payroll by expanding the employee retention tax credit. So both from the grant side and the tax incentive side, we want to make sure we're striking the right balance to be able to do this. And again, I mean, there's steps to making sure we get through this. And one is the public health piece around the pandemic, which is a whole other Zoom call we could do. It's stabilizing that with national standards, national recommendations, national investments around testing and contact tracing and isolating people, and then making sure they have paid sick leave, making sure there's family and medical leave in place for them to make sure they stay home, because people will go to work sick because they have no other choice. And so we have to make sure that those supports are really in place. And then the next piece is, how do you stabilize businesses? That's through the PPP program, payroll protection program, to make sure that businesses don't close because it gets real hard to reopen. So that program was in place to make sure everybody was stabilized. And within the context of that, making sure there is child care that is available for everybody, not just during the pandemic, but hopefully this can be a model moving forward. And those are kind of the key pieces. And the last piece is really healthcare, making sure that everybody has access to affordable healthcare. And I think Mary Beth mentioned it at the end. I mean, you and your workers need access to healthcare. And so if we want people to do these kinds of jobs that are critically important, we've got to build the system, around the kid. And I've just say lastly that, we've got to start rethinking the way we think about issues like this. And if you just put the kid in the center and say, okay, what systems, new systems do we have to put in place around this child to help them thrive? Because, you know, I could get into a whole thing. We're competing against China. We're competing against India. We only have 330 million people in the country. Got these huge issues around globalization and automation. So the key to be successful in that environment is making sure we're investing in the kids and taking the knowledge we have from adverse childhood experiences, taking the research we have around brain science and all of these other things that we've learned, social and emotional learning, trauma-informed care. How do we build a system around, you know, helping these kids develop those healthy relationships, wire their brain properly, get healthy food, gets down into breastfeeding and all kinds of other things that we now know are really important, and build a system around that. And then you'll have a system where kids are able to deal with their trauma, process their emotions, be connected to other human beings, thrive in a learning environment, and then go out and start a business or be a very highly productive worker that could make a good middle-class living. But it all starts with, how are we approaching raising these young kids? So anyway, I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to answer a question or two, but also the question I have just watching the presentation is, you know, you mentioned in the one slide, the 53% in 6 months. So say this doesn't pass, say there's not a lot of help in the next version of the, you know, pandemic response. How do you even last 6 months? I mean, where's the money come from?
Yeah, we're super concerned about that, especially since, you know, I shared with you that the first tranche of CARES dollars are exhausted now in Ohio. And so there are a lot of providers, Congressman, who are heading into August super nervous. And even with the idea that ratios are going to be increased on August 9th, given where the unemployment rate is, and given where there are a lot of parents who are making other choices for their families about congregate care, as Mary Beth pointed out, some of her families are working from home for a while and they don't have the same childcare needs. I know a lot of our providers are living, you know, day to day, let alone week to week. And so we are at a critical juncture. Curtisine might be able to shed some light here on, you know, one of the increasing pressures we're facing on top of all of that, as if all of this isn't enough. With the discussion around schools reopening, a lot of schools are making decisions to do either all virtual learning or some combination of in-person and virtual learning. And there's not a lot of discussion or clarity around how that's going to impact childcare too. And so I'm wondering, Curtisine, if you could quickly just share some of those challenges, and maybe the congressman could help us get some clarity from the feds around whether or not we're going to be able to pay for childcare in those hours and days where kids who are traditionally in school, and therefore you're not allowed to providers can't receive childcare dollars, you know, payment for those kids because they're supposed to be in school. How that's going to work. Parents are still going to have to work. They're not going to be in the school building. The expectation on childcare is unclear, and we can't add insult to injury to providers who are already on the precipice with the expectation they're going to take all these school-age kids with no payment because there's a prohibition in any payment. Curtisine, can you shed some light on that?
Yes, you summarized it exactly. We are preparing for the upcoming school year in Akron, which is for the first 9 weeks online. And we are trying to figure out how to fill in the gaps. How do we service our children throughout the day to assist them with their virtual learning. And in the means of doing that, how do we pay for that and what does that look like? Because right now our reimbursement in the school is a bit less than half than what we're receiving now as far as our summer rates. And we are advocating for that same pay that we're receiving now when we're servicing children all day throughout the summer, for that pay to remain in effect as we help fill in the gap while we're servicing our children through virtual learning. And also to help us retain, find qualified staff to assist in the process.
Yeah, that's I think really helpful context, Congressman, is right now there's no mechanism to pay. So on one hand, we need more resources into the system. On the other hand, there is growing expectation on childcare with no clarity by the federal government on whether or not they can get paid. And so if you can help us at least in getting them to render a decision quickly, so that at least there's some certainty for our providers as you're continuing to negotiate resources to come to the system.
Yeah, happy to do that. I believe my staff is on this call as well, so we'll make sure we follow up on that and either make a call or send a letter and try to get some clarity for you on that. Be happy to do that.
That's great. Laura, Mary Beth, and Curtisine, I wanna be mindful of the congressman's time, but if in 5 to 10 words or less, if you can just give some final comments, the one thing you'd like the congressman to take away from this conversation, and I'll start with you, Laura, and then Curtisine, and then Mary Beth. Laura.
5 to 10 words is keep on doing what you're doing. Thank you for elevating this and continuing to influence those who are empowered to make these changes like yourself. Thank you.
Curtisine.
Okay, I just want childcare, the childcare industry, the workers, to be looked at as first responders, essential, that we are sacrificing our health, our families, for the love, passion, and for our communities. And we would like the same services and benefits and funding that our police officers, our firefighters, our nurses, our doctors receive, because we are there, we are stepping up, and we're not going anywhere. We are committed to this, but we absolutely need funding and support from our federal government, our state legislators, locally, everyone to support us to do this.
Thank you, Curtisine. Mary Beth.
Yes, just I want to say thank you for taking your time and listening and knowing how important what we do every day for these children. And you said it all with all the brain development, everything. We have to be here, we have to be committed, and I have been, and many of my colleagues are too. So thank you.
Great.
Congressman, any final words from you?
Yeah, I just want to everybody. I mean, I know this is a challenging time for everybody, but you're especially on the front lines, and I know how emotionally attached you get to the kids that you take care of, and the businesses that you've grown, or the mission that you do. And Laura mentioned the local support up in Summit County. They've been terrific. All going back to Russ Pry and now Eileen Shapiro, and there's a lot of local legislators and local leaders that are committed to helping you. And DC is not always the easiest place to inject some common sense or arguments about a little investment goes a long way, and that will yield a big return, but it won't be today or tomorrow. It may be in the coming years. And so those programs always end up on the chopping block, because we know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And this is a complete example of the small investments in our kids goes such a long way. And anyway, I know, because I know how my wife gets attached to her kids every single year in school. And just want to say thanks to all of you for being on the front lines. it doesn't go unnoticed by most of us. And so I'm going to do everything I can to carry the torch here for you, and just hang tough, and hopefully we can get something done for you. But really appreciate all your work.
Well, we appreciate you, and thank you again for your time. And we're going to put in the chat box right now a way that all of the constituents, there's a big crowd on here today who are listening in, how we can continue to support you and your efforts is to please contact your members of the United States Senate and other members who can use their voice to join with the congressman, so we can get some much needed relief over the finish line. So with that, Congressman, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for being a partner with us in the fight, and please let us know how we can help you bring the voice of childcare to your conversations.
Will do. Keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists. Have a great day, everyone.